Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be making refried beans. This is the first in a three-parter where I'm going to be making fry bread tacos. It's got a lot of bits and pieces. It's pretty easy, but it does take some time. And these two items we're going to do today, you need to do a day in advance. So let's get to the ingredients and get on our refried beans. Alright, for the first ingredient, we're going to need to make some pickled jalapenos. These are just going to be quick pickled. If you can get a hold of actual pickled jalapenos, they actually will taste a little bit better than this, but this will get you by if you can. So the ingredients we need for this is we're going to need some apple cider vinegar. It's kind of a how much ever you need is how much you need. About 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt per quarter cup of it, and about 1/2 teaspoon of sugar, and in our case we just need 1 jalapeno. So starting with our pickled jalapeno that we're going to be making, you want, for about every quarter of a cup of apple cider vinegar you make, you're going to want about 1/8 of a teaspoon salt and 1/2 teaspoon sugar. Now normally if I was quick pickling like onions or something, I wouldn't use any sugar in it, but in this case since we have the jalapeno, the sugar is going to offset the spiciness and the heat. You do actually want the sugar in it. So the reason I can't tell you how much apple cider vinegar or vinegar, you can use white as well, is going to be the right amount is because it's just how much will actually get your jalapeno at least 90% submerged. And you'll probably have to poke some holes in it, and there's a reason for that. Jalapenos are waxy fruit. They have a sort of almost waterproof layer on the outside, and in this case that waterproof layer is going to make it take forever for these to pickle if you don't puncture a few holes in them. Initially I had just used a toothpick for this, but what I actually recommend is just basically cleaning out the jalapeno and just putting it in there after quartering it, similar to what I'm doing here. This will allow them to pickle in just hours instead of 24 hours. So I usually make this ahead of time and it stays in the refrigerator anyway, but what you want is you'll be able to tell the feel of the jalapeno will start to soften up and it won't be firm and crisp anymore. And that's when you know it's starting to get there. And once it's kind of, you can fold it and it's not really firm at all anymore, that's when you know it's ready for this. And because you do want that nice softness there. Normally you would cut a waxy fruit like this or a bell pepper or other waxy fruits basically with the sort of smooth side down, the outside down as you see on the bell pepper and the jalapeno. Now you would do that normally because you don't want your knife to slip off of that surface while you're cutting. The reason I'm doing the opposite here is, as weird as it is, because of the vinegar, it was actually sliding around on the board, so I did them with the smooth outside skin side up, which again, normally you don't want to do that. You want to reverse that and go with skin side down. If yours do slip like mine were doing and kind of skating around your cutting board, you can either put a paper towel underneath of them or just flip them over and be extra careful, because you won't really have anything protecting you from possibly accidentally slipping and cutting yourself. Now for both of these, I'm just going to cut these down to I'm going about 1/8 of an inch thick, and then I'm going to just turn them on the side and it's about the same thing, 1/8 of an inch. So the whole thing is that I'm going to have all these tiny little pieces of pickled jalapeno that are going to be put all throughout our refried beans. So you'll be able to taste that, and you'll be able to taste the lime, and you get this jalapeno lime refried beans that are going to taste great. And honestly, these are better than you'll get in pretty much any grocery store. And making them yourself does kind of have the advantage that you can tune them to the exacts of what you like. For example, in this, 2 tablespoons of diced jalapenos is going to get me a sort of mild to medium heat. But if you wanted more, you could just add some more jalapenos or add some other peppers that are a little bit hotter. And if you wanted less, you can always cut those down or cut them out completely if you just don't have much of a tolerance for spicy foods at all. Once you get all that done, we can get started on our refried beans, the first part of our fry bread tacos. Oh, and if you're wondering what we're going to do with the rest of the jalapeno, I'm just going to cut those up and use it as toppings on the tacos themselves. So that way we're not wasting anything and you don't have to go through, like 1 jalapeno will cover this whole recipe and it'll give you some for toppings and as well as being mixed in. Also real quick, I did want to mention, if you look at the white stuff, the membrane inside that you saw me when I was cleaning out the inside of the jalapeno, that membrane itself has a very bitter taste. So if you can get rid of that, then it'll actually taste more fruity, a little more sweet, and the spicing will come through better because you won't have that bitter aftertaste that you just definitely don't want. Bell peppers and other peppers also have the exact same thing, and most of the capsaicin is stored in the seeds, so you can leave your seeds in or out as you like your heat as well. Alright, a day later, we can get on to our refried beans. We have our 2 tablespoons of pickled jalapenos, 1/2 teaspoon salt, 1 teaspoon pepper, 1 teaspoon onion powder, 1/4 teaspoon cumin, 1/2 teaspoon garlic powder, 2 tablespoons lime juice, and 2 tablespoons of lard or butter, and a little bit of water. And for the last ingredient that we haven't actually cooked is the beans. If you have an electric pressure cooker like an Instant Pot, you can just do them from dried, about 25 to 28 minutes, depending on how old your beans are. If you don't have one, you'll want to let them soak overnight for about 12 hours, discard that water, and then cook them for about an hour and a half, 2 hours until they're tender, and then you end up discarding that water again. But save a little bit of that for the actual refried beans if you're doing them with the soak. But that's only with a previously soaked bean. If you have a non-soaked bean like an Instant Pot, you need to discard all the water because there's certain compounds in it that do not taste good and also make you a bit gassy. Alright, once our lard is completely melted and our pot's on medium heat, you may go medium low depending on your pot. If it gets a little hot, you'll want to go medium low. You want to be err on the side of cooking longer but with less heat in this one because things can go wrong if you go the opposite direction. But once we have that in there, we're actually going to bloom all of our dried spices in the lard, and that's going to allow all those flavors to just almost immediately be everywhere in this once it starts getting mixed in. Because the density of the beans and how long you're going to be mashing them, that flavors being spread out like that is just going to help out, and it's going to make it a little easier, especially if you like your refried beans a little bit more on the rustic side, which would be sort of chunkier, more big chunks of beans, and less smooth like a restaurant style would be, where it's a very smooth refried bean. So basically you're going to end up having to do this for a while. And you're going to want to get about halfway mashed, and it's going to sound weird and look weird when you see it. It'll be just a really thick bean paste attached to the masher, and you'll see when I use a butter knife to scrape off the masher. And you'll have to do that the first couple times. You'll know you're getting to the right texture. That's actually one of the first signs you're almost there, is that when it's no longer sort of clinging to the masher and it's actually sort of loose enough to drip off. At that point, you know you're getting really close to the texture you want. So what we're going to have to do the whole time is just add a little bit of water, mash some more, add a little bit of water, mash some more once you get this initial mashing done. So, like I said, I'm wanting to basically be a thick paste with most of the beans at least half their original size. And there's not really a set consistency that you want to go for. You want to go with how you like it. If you like it a little chunkier, a little more beany, then leave it a little chunkier, leave it a little more beany. If you like it more smooth, like a restaurant style, you might even have to take a stick blender to it at that point. Or you can also alternatively just keep mashing it as I'm doing here. And every time you go and mash a bunch of this, and then you add a little bit of water, and you mash it some more, mix it up, and eventually, like I said, it's going to get there. Now, you want it to be thinner than you actually want the final product, because as it cools down, it's going to thicken up again. And you can get a little better eye for that and how much it's going to thicken up if you start with cold beans. So if you can, and like I did the pickled jalapenos and the beans the day before, so then when I'm doing the rest of the meal, which is going to be the chorizo and the fry bread, I don't have to worry about those two items. They're just heat up and serve at that point, and they're not going to taste any different, so you don't lose anything by doing them ahead of time. In fact, both of them tend to gain a little bit of flavor. In the case of the beans, they sort of congeal a little bit better, and I found, for my opinion, the texture was a little bit better, especially when you mashed it, because sometimes the texture when you mash, if they're too dry, it can be a little mealy or grainy, and that's not a great texture. So in this case, letting them cool all the way off seems to get the texture to be a little bit smoother even when you're leaving it more chunky. I know that sounds a little confusing, but it's essentially the texture of the actual mashed part is a little more smooth and consistent. But that is a preference. So if you like yours a little more chunky and a little less smooth in places, again, just a little bit less mashing works for that. Jumping ahead a few minutes, once you reach a thick consistency, so what you would expect if you were like a very thick refried beans, you want to take and at that point add your lime juice and your previously pickled jalapenos, and then we can mix everything in, and then we're just going to keep doing the same thing that we were doing before, which is keep stirring, and then you just add a little water, keep stirring, add a little water, keep stirring, and eventually you're going to want to take it to the point where it's thinner than normal. as it cools off, it'll thicken up. So what you think is the texture is probably not quite it. So since you don't want it too thick, you want to bring it to a texture that is just a little bit away from what you would think it is. Just a little bit more watery. Not too much, but just enough to make sure that everything is going to thicken up back into where you want it. In this case, since I'm going to be using these on fried bread tacos, I need it to be a little bit thicker because I certainly wouldn't want that running off. Some restaurant-style refried beans is very thin like that. That's not what we're looking for here. It can have its use. I'm trying to think of one, but I swear I will someday. And it's all really personal preference. Some people like theirs thick, some people like theirs a little thinner, some people actually like theirs almost to a thick soup-like consistency, like a pea soup-like consistency. I don't understand that one either, but hey, they like what they like. So, what you want to do though is just keep doing that. And we're going to sort of fast forward and speed up here, or just jump ahead, depending on how many minutes worth of more bean stirring footage there is. And what I'll show you is the texture I had mine at the end. And like I said, the reason I'm going for this particular texture is I want this to be the base. So I'm going to have the fry bread, and then this is going to be the base sitting on it. That's going to be in between the fry bread and the chorizo, so that all the juice from the chorizo and everything doesn't soak down into the bread, but instead soaks down into our ever so slightly thicker than you would serve at a table refried beans. Now, all of this is going to come together, and this is going to be an amazing taco. Yes, it does take about 3 days to make, but it's only a little bit of work on each one of those days, so technically still easy. Everything you're doing is easy. It's just you have to do it over a course of a couple days. It actually works pretty easy though, because you can just kind of do one of these things in between or while you're doing other things. For example, if you were already doing vegetables for, say, a stir fry or something, and you were to go over and just, throw the jalapenos in there and do a quick dice. A couple days before, you throw them in the refrigerator with the vinegar and the salt and the sugar, and bam, you're done. And it's a couple of days worth of, quote, work, but your actual hands-on time is maybe 10 to 15 minutes at most for everything up until the adding water to the bean part, which is probably another 15 to 20 minutes. You don't have to, there's no doneness to cooking these, by the way. What you just want to make sure is that everything heats up and it gets to that proper texture. And part of the reason we're reheating this at this point is also that reheating process helps us break down the bean into paste. So we want to get it to the point where it's just kind of happily bubbling away for a little bit. You do have to stay there for pretty much all of this because refried beans being thick, even when you have them at a slightly thinner consistency than normal, they do have a slightly easier time burning because of that thickness. The bubbles of air and everything can't quite disperse as fast, so you get sort of a heat load at the bottom, so you have to keep stirring. And since you're already doing this with a masher, this is the best time to do a lot of your finishing mash. So what you see me doing here, and you'll notice it's starting to hit that point right here, when you see me cleaning the masher, you'll notice that it's really not sticking to it anymore, and that's because we finally got everything sort of broken down into that refried bean texture, and this is where we're getting there. We know what the consistency we want ours to be, and this is the very start of the consistency. So if you are for the most rustic or, rough and least mashed version, you would actually keep this version right here, but you're going to have to stir it a lot if you do that because it's going to be so thick. It's still going to have a lot of problems with the heat distributing through the entire pot. On the other hand, if you wanted something more of a medium thickness, you're going to just keep adding water, probably 2 or 3 more times, and you're only adding a tiny bit of water, like a tablespoon and a half, because it's going to go from still too thick to fairly loose pretty rapidly within a small amount of water, because if you've ever made bread, it's similar to sort of dough hydration levels where a tiny amount, like an ounce, could throw off the hydration for a whole loaf by a massive amount. And in this case, since you only want to add a little bit of water at a time for the same reason, which is that it can go from what you feel like is too thick to, oh my god, that's way too thin, in very, very small amounts of time. So let's jump ahead to the end, and I will show you what it looked like at the end for mine. Alright, now once you get your refried beans to the consistency you want, which is, as I said, just a little bit thicker than the actual consistency you want, we are ready to go. You just want to taste it, make sure there's enough salt and pepper. In my case, I wanted a little bit of extra fresh cracked pepper because I wanted that extra bit of pepper in there. But salt was right, everything else was good for mine. You do want to check because that is personal preference. But once you have done these, you are ready to go. If this is all you're going to be making, if this is just refried beans that you want, This is a perfect nice recipe for that if you are doing the fry bread tacos. The flavors in here and the chorizo are now going to complement each other very well because you're going to have a little bit of a little citrusy from here, and then you're going to have a little bit of spiciness from here, and that's going to complement the spiciness of the chorizo and the slightly sweetness of the pork that the chorizo is made out of, making for a very nice, well-balanced fry bread taco. And with that, we now have piece number 1 ready. Only 2 more to go. I'm dividing this up into 3 videos, that way if you want to go reference any one part, you don't have to sit through all the rest, so that should hopefully make it a little easier if you do any of these ingredients. So, I hope that you will try this, because this is really good, and it's going to be an amazing fry bread taco. As always, I'd like to thank everyone who has subscribed and who's sharing these videos. It means the world to me, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, and you'll be able to get the next 2 parts of this so you can make the whole fry bread taco. We're going to be making the fry bread, and we're going to be making the chorizo for it, and that way, no matter where you are, if you can hold on some simple ingredients, you'll be able to do this. Thank you again for watching, and have a great meal.